And we end up doing it. We move all in. It's about 3K in the middle. G'day again everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It's currently a Friday night and I'm not in Melbourne, I'm in Adelaide, South Australia. I've been keen to check out the card rooms over here since 4 years ago at the start of 2020 when I heard about them. Apparently it's similar to the sort of system they have over in Texas with the Texas card houses in that it's not actually a casino, it's just a separate card room that's allowed to run games. I'm so keen to check this place out. We're going to be playing 5-5, potentially 5-5-10 tonight. So keen to get into an action game in a new city. Let's not waste any more time and get in the game. So I get into the card room at about 9 p.m. and immediately I walk in and I see a huge space with about 4 regular poker tables and then one fancy looking one perched up the back that looks like a set out of Live at the Bike or something. And then fortunately, because I'm playing 5-5, which was the biggest game that got up at this card house, I was actually playing at that table for my entire stay, playing at this poker room. And to kick things off, we buy into the first game for 1,000. Let's see if I run it up in the session. Let's go. So the game starts out and everyone agrees to straddle. It's a 5-5-10 game at the start, but around midnight people stop straddling for whatever reason, but the first few hands are with the straddle on. And the other important thing about this card room, the $5 chips are green. So when you see me betting with green chips, it's $5, not 25, which was like a little annoying, but I got used to it pretty quick. So anyway, first hand, I'm under the gun with pocket 4s. Usually I wouldn't open this under the gun, but we are 6-handed. So I think that makes it pretty close. In all honesty, I could see either raising or folding. But we're in a new room. I raise it up to 25, and then an unknown player calls in the cutoff, as does an unknown straddle. So we go 3 ways to a flop of Jack 9-6 with 2 clubs. When the action checks to me, I think we have a pretty easy decision to check here, and then the cutoff checks as well. So we get to see a free turn. It's a beautiful one. It's the 4 of hearts putting out backdoor hearts. Let's go. We turn a set. Straddle checks it to me. I go ahead and bet 35, looking to get a bit of value. I honestly think I could use large sizing here, even up to like 60 or 70, just betting that the board is so wet. There's 2 flush draws. There's a bunch of straight draws on this board, and I really can't get called by those, so should be sizing up a bit larger. But anyway, I made it 35, and then only the cutoff calls. So it heads up to a river, and the river is the 9 of spades, giving us a full house. Now the action's on me, and I think it's a pretty interesting decision whether we want to check raise or just bet ourselves. I do think most of the cutoffs Jack X hands will be betting in position on the flop. However, if they check a hand like that on the flop, we can probably get a bigger bet paid off here. I wouldn't even hate betting out, 150 or even larger than the size of the pot. Having said that though, if my opponent does have a missed flush draw, they're just going to fold when we bet, and then we're not going to make any EV if we do check and induce a bluff. So I decided to check it over to induce bluffs and maybe even build a bigger pot against a 9x hand, which will probably call a check raise. So I check it over to the opponent, and the opponent checks back straight away. So damn, we don't build this pot up any bigger. After betting small on the turn, I turn over my full house, and of course it's good. The opponent mucks and we rake in a pretty small pot. Pretty disappointed how I played this. Could have been a bigger one. Next hand, a loose aggressive small blind goes ahead and open limps. Then I'm in the big blind with Jack 8 offsuit, and I actually decide to over limp here. Probably should be playing raise or fold pre-flop, particularly when I'm going to be out of position to the straddle, but I got a bit too tempted here and threw in the call, and then the straddle checks. So we're 3 ways to a flop of 8-5 deuce rainbow. When the small blind checks it to me, I do consider betting here with a hand of strongest top pair, good kicker. But I actually think the better play is to check it, and it's only because we're playing a pot against 2 loose aggressive opponents who like to pounce on weakness. So I think it's a good spot to feign a bit of weakness, even though we do have a strong hand, and potentially induce bluffs. So I check it over to the straddle. Then my plan works because they go ahead and bet 25, small blind folds, and I think we have a pretty clear call here. Not a good spot to go ahead and check raise. I think we'll be value owning ourselves pretty hard with a check raise here, so I just throw in the call. Then we heads up to a turn, which is the 4 of spades. Not the best turn card in the world, so I check it over to the opponent, who checks back pretty quickly. So we see a river, which is the 4 of clubs, and then I think we have a pretty clear bet here. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of weaker showdown value hands in their range. They're going to check back a few worse 8x hands on a scary turn. I could see them betting the pot like really wide, try and deny equity with like pocket 3s or 5x, which might call a bet on the river. So I go ahead and bet 40, and then the straddle thinks a little bit before throwing in the call. I show my Jack 8 and they end up mucking their hand. Raking in a pot, let's go. So next hand and all the hands moving forward, we're back to regular 5-5, and we're actually having a dinner break at the moment, but of course I decided to play whilst I ate because I'm that kind of degenerate, and I'm in the cutoff with a 9-8 offsuit, and I actually decided to open it up to 15 here. Definitely a very loose open from the cutoff, but I thought both the players in the blinds were playing pretty tight, and I thought I'd be able to steal it pretty often. Having said that, though, the loose aggressive button calls, as does the tight passive big blind. So we're three ways to a flop of ace 5-3 with two hearts. The action checks to me, and I think this is a slam dunk spot to check, multi-way, and then the button checks. So we're three ways to a turn, which is the six of spades, giving us a gut shot. The big blind checks it over to me. Now I want to start betting. I really do think if the button had a ace-x hand or stronger, they definitely would have betted on the flop with their loose aggressive image. Same story with the big blind when they check on the turn, to be honest. So I really do think I'm going to have a stronger range here, and it's a great spot to bluff when I only have 9 high and a gut shot. So I go ahead and make it 40, and then the button folds and the big blind calls. So we're heads up to the river, which is the jack of clubs. The opponent checks it over to me, and I really want to bluff in this spot just because hearts miss, spades miss. I think my opponent is going to be folding a lot. The fact I have 9 high, probably not going to win if I check back. So I decided to bluff here. I think the best sizing would be something smaller, like 60 to 80, just because my opponent is going to have so many snap folds with miss hearts and miss spades. I went ahead and bet 120. This sizing is pretty bad. I think I'm just going to lose a bunch more when my opponent does call with a pair. There's not going to be a lot of elasticity between a bet this size and a bet like 80. So I really don't like my sizing here, but I made it 120, and then the opponent's in the tank probably a good 30 seconds or so before throwing in the call. I show my 9 high, and then they show queen jack offsuit. So damn, wasn't able to fold them off, and maybe I shouldn't be trying to bluff passive opponents this aggressively. Next up, a tight aggressive button opens it to 15, an unknown small blind calls, and I'm in the big blind with ace-3 offsuit, and I throw in the call. So we're three ways to a flop of ace-8-3 with two hearts. Let's go, we make top and bottom pair. But when the small blind checks it to me, you definitely don't want to lead on an ace-high board. Let's check it over to the button and let them bet off their stronger ace-x hands, and then mix in a check raise. I check it over to them, and they check back pretty quickly. So we're still three ways to a turn, which is the queen of diamonds, putting out backdoor diamonds. Now when the small blind checks it over to me, definitely want to go ahead and bet for value here. I think the button probably is going to bet most of their strong ace-x hands on the flop, but they're definitely going to have some worse ace-x hands in their check back range, and I can look to get a bit of value from those with the bet here. So I go ahead and make it 30, and then the button does call, as does the small blind. Okay, so we're still three ways to the river, which is the 5 of hearts, putting in front door hearts. The small blind hesitates a bit before checking it over to me. Still want to bet for value here, try and get paid off by one pair ace-x hands, and there's a few worse two pairs that I think can call as well. Queen 8 suited, queen 5 suited, makes sense for both opponents. So I go ahead and make it 70, and then the button folds pretty quickly, and then the small blind check raises it to 225. So we're getting 2.8 to 1 on a call here. I really don't think we're good 26% of the time. I think the opponent is going to have a bunch of flushes in their range, being that they called in the small blind getting a price. They might even have like 9-2 of hearts, for example. And if I'm looking at the bluffs, they could potentially have maybe like king 8 that was like a pair with, you know, the king of hearts that blocks a nut flush. But I just think there's so few combinations versus all the flushes they're going to have, or even like 4-2 suited for a straight. So considering all that, I really don't think we're good here 26% of the time. So I end up mucking my hand and giving the pot to the opponent. Next up, the hijack opens to 15, the small blind calls, and I'm in the big blind with jack-3 of spades. I decide to throw in the call here. I've been protecting my big blind pretty loosely in these multi-weight pots so far this session, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I don't think it's a good thing either. Whatever the case, we go three ways to a flop of queen 8-6 rainbow with one spade. When the small blind checks to me, pretty easy check here to the pre-flop aggressor, and then they check back. So we get a free turn, which is the 9 of spades. Absolutely beautiful turn. Not only do we have a gut shot, but we have a flush draw as well. When the small blind checks it to me, I heavily consider going ahead and betting here. Very easy for me to represent a strong queen X hand when the flop checks through to the pre-flop aggressor and when the small blind doesn't lead out. The only thing that makes me not want to bet out here is I don't have the best table image at this point, having just shown a bluff. I just think I'm going to have a loose aggressive image, and my opponents will probably put me on a lot of bluffs, and I don't know if I'll even get folds from like single pair hands on this board. So I actually do decide to check it over to the hijack, who goes ahead and bets 20, and then the small blind folds, and in this spot, my logic for not bleeding out sort of also applies to the check raise. I just don't expect to be credibly representing that many strong hands. So I just decide to call and try and take my equity here. So we get to see a river, which is the 10 of diamonds. Let's go, we make the straight. Now, in this spot, I definitely want to go ahead and lead out. I think even if my opponent has a hand as strong as like 9-8 suited, for example, they'll probably just check it back on the river. Betting that will be way too thin. But I think this opponent might call a bet here. Like I said, my table image isn't the best, and they might put me on a bluff if I lead out. So I decide to go for it. I go ahead and bet 100, and then the opponent folds pretty quickly. So really don't think they have much, but either way, we're going to drag in this pot. So it's about 2 a.m. at this point, and here's where the dynamics of the game change pretty significantly. So a villain that I've actually played with before back in Melbourne, but haven't seen in a few years, rocks up to the game with a few of his mates. I think they've just been out partying and clubbing in Adelaide on the Friday night, and by their own admission had been drinking pretty heavily, and were looking to gamble it up at the end of the night for a bit of fun. And then the opponent sits down in the hijack and open raises it to 75. So they actually cover us. We have about 1.5k in our stack, and then we look down at pocket jacks and the button. Definitely going to be good enough to open. I think the opponent is just raising it because they want to gamble, and I'm not even fully convinced that they did look at their cards. So I go ahead and 3-bet it to 200. The action's round to the big blind, who goes ahead and rips it all in for about 1.5k. Then the action's back on the hijack, and they just sort of shrug their shoulders and call the 1.5k. Still not convinced that they've even looked at their cards, but considering the price we're getting to call with jacks here, I think we have an absolute snap call. I'm somewhat concerned that the big blind has a very strong range of hands. They're definitely going to have all the queens plus combinations, but I also think they can have ace king, ace queen suited, even like pocket nines and pocket tens would make sense as a 4-bet squeeze here, given how loose the hijack villain's going to be. So I throw in the call with jacks. The big blind shows us that they have ace king offsuits. We've got a classic race against them. The hijack says they don't want to show their hand until the end, which is fair enough. So we've got the live run out on the vlog, and you can see there, king high flop, no good for us. King on the turn makes things even worse, and then the 6 hearts on the river, GG. We're going to lose this hands to the big blind for sure. Doesn't even matter what the hijack has. But in case you were curious, the hijack turns over 7-5 of hearts. So they actually backdoored the flush to scoop this massive 4.5k pot. Holy crap. Sometimes it pays off to gamble. This has been another Lead Bets public service announcement. This next hand involves the same villain from the previous hand. Before the hand's even dealt, they just ask everyone at the table, anyone at the table, if they wanted to flip for their entire stack, which was about 1.5k, and then no one else said anything, so I'm sort of like, yeah, I mean, why not? I'm happy to entertain a fun player at the game who's giving a lot of action, and a flip's going to be pretty neutral EV, and I say, I'll flip with you if you just give me 20 bucks, because I'm a weasel who wanted to make a little bit of EV out of this decision to do a massive flip. And without hesitation, he chucks me 4 green chips. So now I absolutely have to take this 1.5k flip, and we end up doing it. We move all in. It's about 3k in the middle, and then the dealer deals out the flop. As you can see there, it's a king high flop, and then we go to peel our cards. I ask if they want to show first, and they're like, no, you show first. I turn over the ace of hearts. So there's a pretty good card to turn over straight away. We're still very vulnerable because we're going to lose to any pair. But if my opponent whiffed the board entirely, it's going to be pretty good for us, and we're going to scoop this over 3k pot. So then my opponent shows the queen of hearts, great start. They do not have a pair. We've still got a hell of a lot of outs to fade though, when my opponent goes ahead and peels the 10 of clubs. Let's go. We scoop this massive, massive pot with only ace high. And like I said in the last hand, sometimes gambling pays off. I actually do like my decision to take this flip. Not only was I getting a bit of extra EV with the 20 bucks and entertaining a fun player at the game, but I also feel whenever I play against a Maniac opponent, I really want to try as hard to be the one that stacks them as possible, just because the risk that someone else stacks them and then they just leave the game because they're bored or whatever, like, is pretty high. And when I'm getting what's actually a plus EV spot where I'm making $20 to take the flip, I think it's a slam dunk spot to do it, just to give myself the best opportunity possible to stack the opponent before they blow up and donate their stack to another opponent at the table. I just feel that sense of urgency whenever I'm playing with a Maniac, and I think the decision to take the flip here absolutely was the right one for all of those reasons. Plus, you know, gambling's fun. Next hand, I'm under the gun with King Queen of clubs. I go ahead and open it up to 15. then the button calls and the action's back around to our mate in the big blind, who, despite my concerns, did actually end up rebuying into the game for about 1.2k. And they go ahead and 3-bet it to 30. The action's back on me. I am thoroughly convinced that King Queen suited is way ahead of their 3-bet range, particularly when they min click. So I really want to go ahead and 4-bet here, particularly when we can price out the button from overfloating and try and get the fun opponent heads up. So I go ahead and 4-bet it to 100. The button does fold, and then the big blind throws in the call. So we're heads up to a flop, and it is an absolute banger because it is Jack 10-9 with 2 spades. Let's go. We 4-bet King Queen suited and actually flop the nut somehow. Absolutely blessed in life. The opponent goes ahead and checks it to me. Definitely want to go ahead and bet the nuts here, particularly against this opponent. I go ahead and make it 120. And then the big blind starts staring me down. He starts talking a bit like, oh, what do you have? What are you betting for on this board? And after about 20 seconds of that, they go ahead and rip their stack all in for about 1.1k. I break my wrist, snap calling that bet. And then the opponent's like, oh crap, what do you have? And I show the nuts and he shows ace-2 of spades. So we've got a pretty classic race and we've got the live run out on the vlog. Queen hearts on the turn, that's what we like to see. Let's go, 7 of diamonds on the river. We're gonna rake in this massive pot yet again. We are running like fire hot against this opponent. Let's go. We've got one final hand before we wrap this thing up, and a tight aggressive cutoff goes ahead and opens it to 15. Then I'm in the big blind with 6-5 offsuit, and I actually decide to call again with the loose calls in the big blind. I will say in this instance, we are heads up and we are over 3k effective with the villain, so you definitely want to expand your big blind defending range in that instance. 6-5 offsuit though, it is still pretty loose. Whatever the case, I call, and then we're heads up to a flop of 8-4 deuce with 2 clubs, so double gut shot for us is pretty nice. I check it over to the villain, they go ahead and c-bet 30. In this spot, definitely going to take folding off the table, but between calling and check raising, I actually much prefer check raising. I think the strongest hands, my opponent's definitely going to have all the sets on this board as well as a bunch of combo draws, but a lot of the hands are just going to be over pairs and strong 8x hands, which are going to be tough for them to defend to a check raise and 3 streets barreling off. But even if they do, we're going to hit a gut shot sometimes. So I think it's a great spot to start putting on the pressure. I go ahead and check raise it to 125. Then the cutoff tanks a little bit before throwing in the call. So we get to see a turn, which is the 6 of clubs. So we do make a pair. Having said that though, I think versus the opponent's range that continued to the flop check raise, we're still going to be behind here. Now equity against that range of hands has increased now that we have a pair and more outs to make trips and 2 pair. So I really want to keep putting on the pressure. I go ahead and bet 140. Then the opponent tanks again before throwing in the call. So wasn't able to fold them off on the turn. Let's see what happens on the river, which is the king of diamonds. Now, I actually think this is a great river for me to continue barreling on, just because this is a really scary river for all the overpairs in my opponent's range. I think if my opponent turned a flush, there's very likely they would have raised us there. So I think they're going to have a bunch of hands like pocket nines with a club, through pocket queens with a club, maybe like ace of clubs, 8 of hearts or something. So really want to go for it in this spot. I go ahead and bet 200. Then my opponent is in the tag, probably a good 10 seconds or so. They sigh out loud, look at their hand, and then throw it in the muck. Let's go. We end up pulling the massive bluff off, and what a way to end the session. So those were the most interesting hands I played this session, and in terms of how I feel about my play this session, I'm going to have to give myself a C grade today. Really was pretty underwhelmed with most of my decision making. I think the defending in the big blind thing I can somewhat justify, although the fact that I took the looser option every single time, not necessarily the best thing. But even more of an egregious error than that was some of my bet sizings post-flop in a lot of these hands, betting really small when I had the set, and betting really large when I was bluffing and there wasn't a lot of elasticity in my opponent's range. I just really do think that I was bet sizing wrong. I've talked on the vlog before about how my first time playing in a new room, I'm usually nervous and I do find it harder to play my best game, and I definitely think that was the case in this session. Having said that though, I don't want to make excuses. I did make mistakes this session and I have to punish myself for them with a lower gameplay grade this session, so that's how I landed on a C. Okay, so it's about 5 AM at the moment and I've just got back from the first game here at the Royal Poker Club in Adelaide, Australia.
Had a blast of a time. The venue was so cool. The people I was playing with were fun and talkative, and the only thing that slightly tilted me was the fact that they used green chips for $5 because I kept getting it mixed up and thinking they were $25. But by the end of the session, I got used to it and it wasn't that much of a big deal. Keen to play at this venue for the rest of the time here in Adelaide, so might end up just sticking here and not checking out some of the other venues. We'll see though. Ended up buying into the game for $3,500 and was able to cash out for $3,950. So despite winning that massive blind all-in pot, didn't actually have that much of a profit, probably because I got coolered with the Jack's hand and did make some poor plays, in all honesty, that definitely did decrease the amount of profit I made on the session. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. We've got a bunch more vlogs coming out from Adelaide while I'm up here for the next few days. So subscribe and you'll get those when they come out. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.